Good morning. One more important emergency medicine topic for your knowledge is altitude illness. In altitude illness, importantly, we have three terminologies. One is the acute mountain sickness, AMS, and high altitude cerebral edema, and the one more important one is high altitude pulmonary edema. This AMS and HACE, they both are thought to represent opposite ends of a continuum of altitude related neurological disorders. These both are a clinical diagnosis. How does this AMS present with? This is a neurological AMS, acute mountain sickness, is a neurological syndrome which is characterized by non-specific symptoms like headache, nausea, fatigue and dizziness with a paucity of physical findings, and it develops 6 to 12 hours after ascent to a altitude. So actually because it is a clinical diagnosis, for uniformities in research studies, there is a scoring system called as Lake Lewis scoring system. It was created in 1991 at the International Hypoxia Symposium, which is generally used to diagnose this AMS. Whereas HACE, that is high altitude cerebral edema, it is an encephalopathy whose hallmark are ataxia and altered consciousness. In this HACE, there will be diffuse cerebral involvement, diffuse cerebral edema, but generally without focal neurological deficits. Progression to these signal manifestations sometimes can be rapid, and papilledema, more commonly the retinal hemorrhages, may develop in patients. In fact, these retinal hemorrhages can occur frequently once the ascent is more than or equal to 5000 meters, even in individuals without clinical symptoms of this AMS or HACE. But it is unclear whether retinal hemorrhage and cerebral hemorrhage at high altitude are caused by same mechanisms. What are the risk factors for the development of acute mountain sickness and high altitude cerebral edema? The most important risk factors for the development of high altitude sickness are the rate of ascent. So it depends on the rate of ascent and a prior history of high altitude illness. Exertion is a risk factor, and also the debilitating fatigue for a mountaineer who comes down may be susceptible for the development of this altitude sickness. People less than 50 years of age are less likely to get affected because of this AMS, whereas children and adults seem to be equally affected. In women, adaptive responses to hypoxia with aging are blunted by menopause, but it can be maintained with endurance training. Another important risk factor is sleep desaturation, which is a common phenomenon at high altitude that is also associated with AMS. If the patient has already undergone neck irradiation or surgery which has damaged their carotid bodies, if they have dehydration and respiratory tract infections, they appear to be the other potential risk factors for altitude illness. So these are the risk factor for the development of altitude illness. What is the pathophysiology of this altitude illness? The main trigger for this altitude illness is hyperbaric hypoxia. Severe hypoxia, what does it do? It can lead to greater than normal increase in the cerebral blood flow. However, the exact mechanism underlying this AMS and HACE are unknown. So there is a central nervous system process which will be undergoing in patients with altitude sickness. Whenever they do MRI in such patients, it has suggested that there is a vasogenic cerebral edema which is involved as a component of pathophysiology of HACE, because in HACE we are seeing the diffuse cerebral edema. The main organs or the main sites which are involved in HACE is the corpus plenium of corpus callosum. So in MRI there is an increased signal in white matter of splenium of corpus callosum. There are hemosiderin deposits in the corpus callosum which will be taken as long-standing footprints of HACE. Then hypoxia-induced chemical mediators like histamine, arachidonic acid and VEGF, they all contribute to cerebral edema. So VEGF was the first proposed potent promoter of the capillary leakage in the brain at high altitude. And there are other mediators like calcium mediated nitric oxide and neuronally mediated adenosine, which may promote the vasodilatation. The most common symptom of AMS is the headache. The pathophysiology of the most common and prominent symptom headache, it remains unclear, and sometimes it is told that it could be multifactorial, because the brain itself is an insensate organ. It doesn't have as such the sensory receptors to sense the pain. Only the meninges contain the trigeminal sensory nerve fibers. So various chemicals and mechanical factors, they activate the common final pathway that triggers the trigeminal-vascular system, which is also a common pathway for the migraine. So in the genesis of high altitude headache, the response to NSAIDs and steroids, they provide indirect evidence for the involvement of arachidonic acid pathway and inflammation. So almost both the migraine and the high altitude headache, the pathophysiology or the common pathway is the trigeminal-vascular system. How to prevent and treat the patients with altitude sickness? Gradual ascent should be there with adequate time for acclimatization. This is the best method for prevention of altitude illness. Even though there may be individual variation in the rate of acclimatization, a conservative approach would be graded ascent of less than 300 meters from the previous day's sleeping altitude above 3000 meters. That means that above the altitude of 3000 meter, everyday ascent should be less than 300 meters. And taking every third day of gain in sleeping altitude as an extra day for acclimatization. So after every third day, they should take an extra day for acclimatization. So spending one night at an intermediate altitude before proceeding to a higher altitude may enhance acclimatization and attenuate the risk of development of AMS. and patient should be properly hydrated. They should not be overhydrated. Properly hydrated, because there will be increased sweating because of exertion and increased respiration. Hydration is one important thing to prevent AMS. You can also ask the patient to take pharmacological prophylaxis. It should not be given to all the patient. It is given to the patient, those who have already a history of AMS, or whenever a graded ascent is not possible. Graded ascent with acclimatization are not possible. So when does it occur? In rescue purposes, and when flight to high altitude location is required. That time pharmacological prophylaxis is a must. So the pharmacological agent is acetazolamide, which is the drug of choice. It is given in the dose of 125 to 250 milligram one day before the ascent, and can be continued for 2 to 3 days, which will be effective. Then how does this acetazolamide act? It inhibits the renal carbonic anhydrase, causing prompt bicarbonate diuresis that leads to metabolic acidosis and hyperventilation. The common side effects of acetazolamide are paresthesia and tingling sensation. Other drugs like dexamethasone is also effective. It is given in the dose of 8 mg per day in divided doses. Other drugs like ibuprofen 600 mg thrice daily and acetaminophen 1 gram thrice daily can be given. But before giving this high doses of NSAIDs, patient should be asked for GI irritation and a risk for gastrointestinal bleeding. So this is a table showing the management of altitude illness. Acute mountain sickness, if it is mild, then discontinuation of the ascent and treatment with acetazolamide, and descent is the treatment. If it is moderate AMS, then immediate descent for worsening symptom and use of low flow oxygen if available, and treatment with acetazolamide same 250 milligram, or you can give the dexamethasone and hyperbaric therapy. If there is high altitude cerebral edema, then there should be an immediate descent or evacuation and administration of oxygen 2 to 4 liters per minute, and treatment with dexamethasone 8 milligram intravenous will be the better choice, and hyperbaric therapy if descent is not possible. In case of high altitude pulmonary edema, immediate descent or evacuation and minimization of exertion while the patient is kept warm, and administer the oxygen at a higher dose, that is 4 to 6 liters per minute, to bring the oxygen saturation at least above 90 degrees. Then adjunctive therapy like nifedipine 30 milligram extended release is given, and hyperbaric therapy if descent is not possible. You can see this is a hyperbaric bag. If descent is not possible, so you can use the hyperbaric bag. So this is a cylindrical portable nylon bag which is less than 7 kgs, and it has a one-way valve to prevent carbon dioxide buildup. So a patient with severe acute mountain sickness or the high altitude cerebral edema or high altitude pulmonary edema will be zipped inside the bag if the descent is not possible, and then it is continuously inflated with a foot pedal. You can see the foot pedal here. So it will be continuously inflated. Then the increased barometric pressure inside the bag simulates the descent. For example, at 4,250 meters, the equivalent elevation inside the bag will be approximately 2,100 meters. And here no supplemental oxygen is required. Almost it shows that the height is 4,250, then inside the bag it will be 2,100 meters. This is the hyperbaric bag. This is how you are going to diagnose a patient with acute mountain sickness or high altitude cerebral edema and pulmonary edema, and you need to treat them accordingly. So if you want to give them the prophylactic treatment, then it is the acetazolamide, which is the drug of choice. Next topic is the bee stings. So in your emergency postings, you will be seeing many patients coming with various poisonings, insect bites, and one among them is the very important bee stings. And the stinging apparatus of the bees and the attached venom sac, they tear loose from the honeybee's body whenever there is a sting from the honeybees. And once it is torn, the muscular contraction of the venom sac continues so that the venom gets injected into the skin. This polypeptide venom of bee sting, it includes the toxins which damages the cell membranes, and also the mast cell degranulating proteins which releases histamine, and also a neurotoxin which will be released, that is apamine, and adolophin, that is not adolphin, that is adolophin. So what are the clinical features of patients who presents with bee sting? So the bite site will be having pain and wheal flare reaction, vomiting will be there. Some patient may complain of diarrhea, hypotension, dyspnea, and non-anaphylactic circulatory collapse. Rhabdomyolysis and intravascular hemolysis also will be there in some of the patients, and large local reactions will be accompanied by erythema, edema, warmth and tenderness that spread more than 10 centimeter around the sting site over 1 to 2 days. Then how are you going to treat the patients with bee stings? So these honeybee stingers which are embedded in the skin can be removed as soon as possible, so that it can limit the quantity of the venom delivered, because whenever there is a bee sting, as I told you, there will be a venom sac also which will be detached with that stinging apparatus. So from the venom sac, the venom keeps releasing inside the skin. As soon as you see a patient with bee sting, you try to remove the stingers so that you can limit the quantity of the venom delivered. The stinger and the venom sac can be scraped off with a blade or a fingernail or edge of a credit card, or it can be more precisely removed with forceps. And once it is removed, the site should be cleaned and disinfected, cleaned with soap and water, or it is disinfected, and then ice packs should be allowed to slow the spread of the venom. Then elevate the affected site and administer oral analgesic if the pain is mild. If severe, you can give the IV analgesics or the IM analgesics, then also the antihistaminics depending on the severity, and also you can apply topical calamine lotion. For severe anaphylactic reaction, which is a life-threatening emergency, the prompt life-saving actions become necessary. So the patient need to be given subcutaneous injection of epinephrine hydrochloride, that is epinephrine adrenaline, 0.3 ml of 1:1000 dilution should be given. The treatment can be repeated every 20 to 30 minutes as necessary. Then tourniquet, if it is applied, it may slow the spread of venom. Then supportive treatment, if the reaction is very severe, patient can be treated with vasopressors If there is a hypertension, respiratory failure, intubate the patient and give mechanical ventilatory support. Supplemental oxygen therapy should be given. Fluid resuscitation, then bronchodilators and parenteral antihistamines. And the patient should be observed for 24 hours for recurrent anaphylaxis, renal failure or coagulopathy. So this is how you treat the patients with bee stings. Then one more important is the scorpion stings. So how does this scorpion stings will affect the person? Is these scorpions, they paralyze their prey and then they defend themselves by injecting the venom from a stinger on the tip of the tail. These scorpions sting the humans only when they are threatened. Otherwise, they are not going to harm you. Some venom contain neurotoxin that causes sodium channels to remain open, and it will lead to the hyperexcitability of the skeletal muscles. What are the clinical features? Most of the time there will be only swelling and local reactions, but they will have prominent pain. And if there is a neurotoxin, then paresthesia and hyperesthesia can be complained of. This paresthesia and hyperesthesia can be accentuated by tapping on the affected area. That is also called as the tap test. Then because of the neurotoxin in the venom, dysfunction of cranial nerves and hyperexcitability of the skeletal muscles develop within hours. Patient will be restless, tachycardia and arrhythmia, hypertension, nausea, vomiting, diaphoresis, muscle twitching, jerking, hyperthermia can be there, and sometimes rhabdomyolysis and acidosis can also occur in case of severe envenomation. And these symptoms progress to maximal severity in approximately 5 hours and they subside within a day or two. But sometimes the pain and paresthesia can last for a few weeks, and fatal respiratory arrest can also occur in case of young children and elderly. So how are we going to treat the scorpion stings? Scorpion stings, because most of the time it can be mild, just ice packs, analgesics and antihistamines will help the patient to recover from scorpion sting. And patient even can be discharged home, and they should be educated about the alarming symptoms at which they need to visit the hospital for further treatment. So if they have cranial nerve involvement or some neuromuscular dysfunctions are developing, then aggressively we need to treat the patient with supportive and judicious use of antivenom should be done. There are specific antivenoms available for the scorpion sting which can be given to subside all these symptoms. But it should be given cautiously, because one is the availability of this antivenom and also the cost effectiveness. So therefore antivenom should be reserved only for the most severe scorpion stings or the most severe envenomations. So this is about the scorpion stings. How we are going to identify the scorpion stings? Anyways, the patient will be telling you he is stinged by scorpion, and you need to observe for the signs and symptoms of this scorpion stings. If there is a severe symptoms, you need to act aggressively and also give antivenom therapy. So all these questions can be asked for 5 marks or 3 marks, especially the high altitude sickness. Thank you.